Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that yeah, I know, you're reciting it along with me. I say the same thing every week, but it's an important thing to say. Now I've messed you up. It's okay. Sometimes you need to shake the tree a little bit. On a weekend morning here across the Commonwealth of Virginia, it's a republic, not a democracy. It's a theme that you and I have discussed so many times, but I don't think you or I thought to actually write a book titled that. And sometimes when you get into these gaslit times we're in, getting it back to the basic point of the conversation is important. And joining us now, none less esteemed than the president of FreedomWorks, Adam Brandon, is on the Newsmakers line with us. He has a new book out titled "It's a Republic, Not a Democracy: How to Restore Sanity in America." Bless you. I hope you have every ounce of success. Adam, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation. And to be honest, this is the second book I wrote. And what happened was when I was turning in my first manuscript, you had the lockdowns, you had just some of the other crises that were happening in our society, the race riots, just everything was happening. And I thought the book I wrote no longer matched the time. It was written for kind of that pre-COVID era. Mm-hmm. And so I sat down and I thought, man, this is really a lot worse than I thought. Like, what we're actually fighting for right now is the basic fundamentals of being a republic. And I thought about Benjamin Franklin walking down the street when he said to the young woman, "It's a republic if you can keep it." And I thought, man, that's the moment we're living in right now. Truth. This is the moment that Franklin said that was going to come someday. And so I wrote this. It's a much shorter book than my first draft. And the whole point of it was to get across to folks why we are a republic, why we are not a democracy. And at the end of it, my whole point of this is that the only way you're going to preserve that is if your listeners get involved.
We were saying last week on my local program that our governor does most of his COVID-19 proclamations from a building ironically named for the fellow that said, "Give me liberty or give me death." Today, it's "For the fear of death, give up your liberty." Right. And I think Franklin was noting the fact that this was controversial even then, that having a government at all would create the opportunity for this kind of, I think, slow-moving mission creep until we get into the mid-'60s, and then, it takes some steroids and takes off until the '80s, and then Reagan sort of slows it down a little bit. But we've gotten to this point where we expect the government to take care of us. And I think if you want to have a debate on whether or not free speech or housing is a God-given right and which kind of government should provide it for you, that's fair. But one of the things I appreciate about your book is it brings it back to that level, to saying, listen, if you want to talk about tyranny and you want to talk about collectivist states, let's at least first acknowledge what we're supposed to be living under in this republic.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons that I wrote this is a lot of people in my activist community wanted something they could hand to their brother or their sister, or they could give to their kids to kind of explain why, I'm trying to put this in not as academic, but in basic, just English, why the founders set up this system. And then again, the whole thing that our founders thought is that this is only going to work. The central government is going to continue to grow, but we're going to set up these checks and balances. But the biggest check on power is going to be an active citizenry. In my experience, and I've been at FreedomWorks now for 16 years, I've been president now for 6. My experience is that when politicians, their greatest fear is their voter. And when the voters demand something, politicians respond. Politicians are very thin-skinned individuals. Mm-hmm. So if they keep hearing from our base what they want, what is not this $3.5 trillion package that the Senate's about to move on here. If that's what they hear, then I think that's why you're starting to see people like Manchin in West Virginia and Sinema in Arizona balking at some of this, because they're hearing from their voters. So if we're going to preserve this republic, that means everyone who's listening, it's not about just getting ticked off at the media and voting. It's about actually making that call to your congressman or going to visit your senator's office. It's not that hard to do, but it's incredibly influential and powerful in our system.
The noted political columnists Abbott and Costello once did a program in which I think it was Costello was debating with a police officer, and he said, "You're a public servant, right?" And the police officer said, "Yeah." And the answer was, "Go get me a sandwich." I feel like, in a very coarse way, that's where we've gone as a country. We are no longer looking at these folks in government office to protect our God-given rights. We're looking for them to bring what we used to say, bring the bacon back to the district, but now it's become even more personal. What are you going to send to my house? It may be in an Amazon box.
Well, and I kind of talk about it in my book. This is why this whole rise of critical race theory is so troublesome to me, because in a republic, we are trying to appeal to the better angels of all men. We are and women too, but we're trying to appeal to our better sides of what can we do as a republic together. I think about John Kennedy when he said, "Ask not what you can do, your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." That is the ethos of a republic.
Yep.
In a democracy where that we're kind of somewhere edging us into right now, the problem that you face is that all of a sudden it becomes, what can you give me and what can you give my group? And when you start breaking the world down into identity-based politics and you start thinking about my tribe ahead of the country, a republic won't function that way anymore. And then you look around the world, and that's what starts to happen with different countries. They kind of descend into these little tribal cliques, and then they lose their opportunity to have influence and prosperity. And that's what's on the line right now. And we've picked a pretty bad time in world history to have this self-inflection point, because we have the rise of China on the other side of the Pacific. Mm-hmm. And if we give up leadership because we're going to decide to look inward, we're going to lose our ability to shape our futures. So it is very important. But as long as if we keep the framework of the republic strong, I'm very confident we will meet any challenge that the world, the economy, that China could ever throw at us.
Adam Brandon is president of FreedomWorks, author of his second book. This one is A Republic, Not a Democracy, How to Restore Sanity in America. Adam, I want to continue in our discussion, but first, I always forget this until the very end. We've sold enough copies of the books. If I could just tell people where the best place is to get it. Should they just go to freedomworks.org, but a lot of folks are, purchased it through Walmart, purchased it through Amazon, any place that you would normally grab a book. The book is up and selling, and I'm pretty happy that we sold over 5,000 copies, and for me, that's a pretty good run, and I'm pretty happy. Oh, we need to keep selling these with still a month of summer left, beach reading, this kind of thing. But as you mentioned, also gift it. Once you've read it, consume it, and then send it to your cousin who's always arguing with you and sticking his finger in your chest and so on and so forth.
And I may be a terrible book negotiator, but every cent of profit from the book has gone to my institution, FreedomWorks. I actually haven't even gotten a penny off of the project, because I wanted this to be a FreedomWorks project, because it is so important for me that people get involved in grassroots. And again, I wrote this so that you could hand this, you could enjoy it, but then hand it off to someone in your family who's like, I don't know if I want to get involved, or I don't know. I hear about this republic democracy thing. Well, it's not that big of a deal. It is. And it's this stability that this republic has given us is why we've had hundreds of years of prosperity. You get rid of that stability of the republic, all bets are off.
I want to circle to that in a little while with apologies to the White House press secretary. I catch myself, and I'm about to say circle back, and I'll have to send her $5. But stick a pin in that for a moment. I want to go back to something you said right before the break about better angels. Because John Adams famously said that our Constitution was wholly inadequate for an immoral society. I think back, it wasn't all that long ago when I was fighting with, I think it was Margaret Downey from the Free Thought Society. I discovered that she was from the same town in Pennsylvania I was in, out there famously fighting against the 10 Commandments on courthouse walls. And he said, well, all right, let's go through these. Which ones do you have a problem with? And she blustered and she said it's a sexist document because women were property. And I said, no, they weren't, because then why would coveting be different than stealing? Why would covet your neighbor's wife have to have its own separate category? Stealing would have covered it. And she stormed out of the studio. But I bring this up because we've unplugged the Ten Commandments, the humility of the Judeo-Christian ethic that there are bigger things than just what you need, and we've substituted the Marxist belief that right and wrong is irrelevant outside of just accomplishing the goal.
Well, I appreciate you bringing up the topic. Now, I come from the economic side of the movement. That's what I studied. That's what I've always been so interested in, is economics, debt, society. But here's what this struck me years and years ago. Everyone knows about Adams and his book, The Wealth of Nations, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone that's the beginning of capitalism when you look at Adam Smith and The Wealth of Nations. Yep. That was his second book. His first book, and this is fascinating to me, was called Theories on Moral Sentiments. And it's interesting to say but he basically set up for capitalism to work, you have to have a moral people, because the whole concept behind capitalism that Adam Smith was getting at is that if my version of capitalism is I'm going to sell you something and I'm going to overcharge you and give you bad goods, that's not capitalism. That's fraud. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't work. His point is, if I'm going to sell you something, I need to put my reputation behind the product, and I need to sell you what you actually thought you were going to get, because if you get that, then we can continue to exchange. And so it's the same thing. I look at that book, The Wealth of Nations, The Rise of Capitalism, goes hand in hand with the rise of our country, and based on these rules of property rights and different things that come out of a lot of these books. But again, all of these authors, what they were assuming is that you were going to have a people that were moral and just. And then you would have a system of rule of law. So when people step out of that moral and just system, that there is a way to punish those. And if we are good to each other, you don't need the big government then. And I also break down, when I think about, and I'm writing this, in this version of the Republic, the fundamental unit that these founders saw. I mean, yes, it's all about the individual, but it's about the family. I mean, the individual exists in a family. And I look around, and I have a little boy now, just about to turn 7 months here.
God bless
you.
I
really don't understand. I mean, my heart goes out to anyone who's trying to be a single parent, because it is so hard to have two parents. And I think about that, and I think about how hard life can be. And you rely on friends, and particularly your family, to get you through those moments. And I always knew how hard things would be. I could stay on my sister's couch, and then therefore I wouldn't need to turn to government. So I'm a big proponent of, if you look at the basic unit, if you have strong families, you're going to have a strong society.
It's what I think it was Russell Kirk wrote about, the voluntary community rather than forced collectivism. And it may look the same at the end result, but voluntary community is so much more righteous, so much more powerful, and so much more enduring than forced collectivism.
If we had to fight, say, a war again, God forbid we have to fight a major war again, and people get drafted up because it's a World War II style war. If it's a voluntary effort, and that's where you get those citizen soldiers that persevere. Mm-hmm. Imagine if we, after 20 more years of critical race theory, and you jump into that foxhole, and the person next to you may be a different race, are you going to trust them?
Mm-hmm. Well, we see this in the Army now. We see what they're teaching in the Army right now, Adam.
And that's what scares me, is that I want to be in that foxhole, and I don't care if you're black or you're of Chinese descent or whatever you are. I want to make sure that we are known as Americans together. We will have each other's back, and that's what's so important in a republic. Mm-hmm. Now, if you move to a democracy where it's everyone's just going for their own little tribe, will I be able to trust that person who doesn't look or act like me? And that would probably begin the beginning and the end of the great American experiment. But the good news is we're far away from that point. I'm very optimistic we're going to be able to pull all this back. But I do think this is an inflection era that's going to require everyone to get involved in our body politics.
You mentioned prosperity, and now here we go. I'm going to unpin it from the wall because you brought up exactly what I was getting at. We have created almost a false front facade of prosperity. We don't have capitalism. We have cronyism. We have businesses, K Street, etc. And I'm not saying people don't deserve to have a voice with their elected officials, but the regulatory state has learned so quickly that through that they can generate lots of revenue for themselves, both on the political end and in contributions elsewhere. That's going to be one of the biggest things that we have to tear apart is the centralization of our economy, and that creates the poverty in which the critical race theory seems to take root. Adam, am I crazy in thinking that?
I have a chapter in my book. In the book, the chapter is about the swamp and my experiences. And you have the swamp in Washington, D.C., but you have a swamp in Richmond. Mm-hmm. And then you have a swamp in your local city council. Doesn't matter, wherever government is, you do have this kind of swamp. And what the swamp I always identify is you've got the career politicians, then you've got the lobbyists, then the media, then the regulators, and then I throw in a fifth category, the political consultants, and all of these five groups need each other, and they're symbiotic. And so when everyone talks about partisanship, well, the swamp is bipartisan. And if you get to be members of those clubs take care of each other, and they cover each other. And the politicians, they like to slough off work over to the regulators. And so when there's a job-killing regulation, the politician can be outraged, but they don't have to vote for anything. The only way that I see you short-circuit the swamp is if it's citizen engagement and citizen activism, people getting involved and actually going to that school board meeting, which is just the greatest revolution that we're seeing happening across our country. It's when people get involved that all of a sudden the politician fears them and not the benefits of the swamp. That's the only way you short-circuit it. And that's the way, if you can demand that the politicians pull power back from the regulators, that's the only way we're defeating the regulatory state.
I saw a story you talk about, what's happening at the school board level. The percentages of the black community that were homeschooling was 3% before and 16% now. And I refer to this statistic as the underground school bus, these black families are leaving public education because they've seen how badly it's failed them, and they've seen how so much better it can be even if they do it themselves. Does this empower even a robust money follows the child kind of school choice campaign, Adam, just as a thought?
I'm so glad you brought this up, because this is one of those great sources of optimism I have for the future of our country. Everything in our world today, you customize. Everything. You customize what do you want on your burger. You can customize what you want to wear. You're buying a car. Generally, you don't show up and get what's on the lot. You can go online and pick and choose the exact color and engine that you want. But we can't customize our education for our children. We kind of put them in a system and just kind of bang them through it like they're all the same. I couldn't read until I was in fourth grade. I'm an excellent reader. Today, but I had some early struggles with some disabilities, but I was a pretty creative kid. But you put me through that system, I could have fallen through the cracks. Why can't we have a more customized system for kids like me that have late bloomers in certain areas? And I think what you're starting to see is I would like the money that we're spending on education to follow the student, not the system. And that's that parent who's, you're talking about the 16% of black parents who are having their tutoring their own kids. Why can't we support them with money?
Yeah.
Why can't we support them with what they're trying to do at home? But I would rather be buying them computers and books than sending it to some faceless bureaucrat.
Absolutely, and they would spend it better. And that's 16% without that ability, and these are some of the poorer families. Last one for you, Adam. couple of minutes left here on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Adam Brandon, president of FreedomWorks book, A Republic, Not a Democracy. We've lasted a long time in terms of democratic governments. And I think it's because of all the checks and balances that Madison and the Constitutional Convention was able to put in. Are there enough of them still there that we can use it as a fulcrum, even in the world of activist judges who are more worried about, what they're going to be said about in the paper the next day? Is there enough left of the checks and balance system to keep us and help us get back to it?
Absolutely. And I have a lot of evidence. Some of the evidence I'll point to is we just discussed with the school boards. I think what you're starting to see is this revolution where it's not just parents, but also taxpayers in these communities realize, hey, I have a say, too, in what my tax dollars are going to in instruction. And I think actually the more we get people involved at the local level, the more they feel empowered to get involved at the federal level. Amen. And at the end of the day, if we demand our politicians have a certain fidelity to these checks and balances, and we reward politicians who stand up to the swamp, then you will start to see kind of a resurgence of those. But the flag, the fabric of our republic, it may be strained, it may be ripped, it may be torn, but it's up to us in this generation to repair it, to come to its aid, to rethread where it's gone weak. I think there's some simple laws that have gotten close in the Senate, which say things like if there's going to be $100 million in impact, the House and the Senate have to vote on that regulation. Mm-hmm. So there's legislation that can help. There's lots of things. I think there's this. I think even the left is starting to understand that federalism is a good thing. So I am optimistic, and I'm watching people vote with their feet, moving from places like California to Florida for freedom. And that shows that the federal system is still works. The republic still works. But again, it all comes down to people getting involved. If people don't get, the tools are there, but if they are not used, we will become kind of a centralized techno-democracy, mm-hmm. and where you have an elite class that is basically making the calls for everything else. And some of our traditions will fade away, kind of like the old Roman republics traditions that lasted into, for hundreds of years, even though they weren't effectual. Our republic is still there and strong if and only if citizens get involved.
Well, it's funny because I printed out a copy of your book that was sent to me by PDF, and it's in my studio next to Lawrence Reed's Are We Rome, which I sometimes read just to scare the snot out of myself because there wasn't a word for socialism, but that sure became it pretty quickly then.
Not to scare everyone, but the fall of Rome, to me, when I look back at it, it was the 3rd century monetary crisis when, to pay for some of their wars, they debased their silver coins from about 80% silver to 5% silver, rapid inflation, and it broke down the trading system within the empire and never recovered.
And when the barbarians showed up, most of the Romans were like, "Yeah, whatever." They were struggling. Yeah, there was not even a fight really about it, and it's amazing stuff. Gosh, it's been a great visit with you, Adam. We have to have you back again real soon. A Republic, Not a Democracy, at freedomworks.org. Thank you so much, and have an awesome weekend.
All right, you too, and thanks very much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. For all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, virginiainstitute.org. My name is Joe Thomas. Until next weekend, so long, and thanks for all the fish.